Good morning. It is Wednesday, February the 16th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, the Star-Spangled Banner, and the Pledge of Allegiance, we will have no free lunch, no predictions, and the Harvard plan for the working class man. All that and more when I come back. Thank you. Ineffable Creator, who out of the treasures of thy wisdom has appointed 3 hierarchies of angels and set them in admirable order high above the heavens, and has disposed the divers portion of the universe in such marvelous array. Thou who art called the true source of light and supereminent principle of wisdom, be pleased to cast a beam of thy radiance upon the darkness of my mind and dispel me from the double darkness of sin and ignorance in which I have been born. Thou who makest eloquent the tongues of little children, fashion my words and pour upon my lips the grace of thy benediction. Grant me penetration to understand, capacity to retain, method and facility in study, subtlety in interpretation, and abundant grace of expression. Order the beginning, direct the progress, and perfect the achievement of my work. Thou who art true God and man, and livest and reignest forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. And now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for February the 15th and February the 16th. February the 15th, prepare to engage the enemy. My child, prepare for battle. As a good soldier of my Son, Christ Jesus, you must endure your share of suffering. Your enemies are my enemies, and just as I hate those who rebel or refuse to obey me, so you must also hate my enemies. Separate yourself from Satan and from anyone who gets entangled with the affairs of this life. Remember the power available to you through my Son. There is power in the blood of my Son. His blood cleanses you from all sin. Give no place to the devil, but be sure that you operate in righteousness. My righteousness will give you confidence and boldness. My righteous servants are as bold as a lion. Engage the enemy boldly, and my protection will be your covering. Proverbs 28, verse 1, 18, verse 37, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3, and chapter 14. Prayer declaration. Father, you have seated me through Christ in heavenly places, far above all principality and power. You have equipped me to engage the enemy and have promised that I will be victorious through you. I stand boldly ready to use your weapons of warfare to utterly destroy the enemy and all the works of darkness. I will not turn back until they are all destroyed. Amen. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for February 15th. February 16th, understand my power and authority. I use ordinary people to accomplish my purposes. Your ability to overcome in my spiritual warfare comes from my power and authority. Do not base your faith on how you feel. Base your faith on my word. I have given you the legal right to use the name of my Son, Jesus. His name is above every other name. Authority in his name is recognized by the enemy. You will be able to cast out demons in his name. You can bind the works of darkness in his name. Through his name and in the power you will receive from my Holy Spirit, you will be able to do so exceedingly abundantly according to the power that operates through you. Fear not. Prepare to engage the enemy. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 12, Luke chapter 10, verse 19, Acts chapter 1, verse 8. Prayer declaration. Father, through your power and authority, I will confront the powers of darkness. In your Son's name, I will defeat Satan and all his demonic warriors. You have given me the ability to endure and withstand hardships, adversity, and stress. I will be persistent in dealing with the enemy, and because of who I am in you, I will be victorious. Amen. And that was the daily declaration for February the 16th. Thank you, thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is the person that has the courage of his convictions and is confident in what he knows. He is the person that understands that cultural conservatism is more important than political conservatism. He is not selfish, but minds his own business. He acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He expresses what he knows and does so with certainty. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he's better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that. If you don't know with every fiber of your being that being a true conservative is best, then you're wasting your time. Thank you, and now there's no free lunch. Markets are not just about the steam engine, iron foundries, or today's silicon chip factories. Markets are also support Shakespeare, Haydn, and the modern book superstore. The rise of oil painting, classical music, and print culture were all part of the same broad social and economic developments, namely the rise of capitalism, modern technology, rule of law, and consumer society. Tyler Cohen. This point is not made enough when we describe the fruits of the free enterprise tree, and that is because those who hold markets in contempt of every objective of commercializing enterprise as something sinister. When economics are more rightly viewed as the outpouring of human action, we see a much more holistic picture, that which is consumerist and, yes, that which is beautiful, all from the same system and support mechanism. And that was There's No Free Lunch. Thank you. So I'm listening to the two guys that replaced Rush Limbaugh on the radio, and one of them said, ask somebody to make a prediction, and immediately I shut off the radio so I could whine and complain about this. Never, ever, as a true conservative, if you want to be a true conservative, don't fall for the make a prediction trap. Making a prediction presumes that the universe operates at random and is unpredictable. And the best thing that we can do is draw straws or spin the wheel or whatever and take a guess. No, it's not true. Things happen in a very orderly way, in a way we can know and understand, and therefore we can ask the question, the real question, what should so-and-so do? What should be done in this particular case? So things happen for a reason, and so we ask, what should be done? By the way, that's the question that everybody on this earth asks. Ethics exists, morality exists because we know, and they exist and are universal. Rights and wrongs are universal because we know that every human being on this planet asks themselves the same question every day, over and over and over again, and that is, what should I do? What should I do? They don't ask, what will I do? They don't ask themselves that question. That's ridiculous. You don't wake up in the morning looking at the ceiling going, gee, what will I do? No. You ask, what should I do? What's the first thing I should do? Okay, so that's the question. Anytime somebody comes to you and says, what do you predict is going to happen? You want to say, that's the wrong question. The right question is, what should be done? And then you can give them an intelligent answer from there. You can say, I don't know what should be done because I don't have enough information. Or if it's fairly obvious, then you can say what should be done is X. Or what shouldn't be done is Y. So remember that what will happen at being asked to make a prediction is a left-wing trap. Stay out of it. And also, as a true conservative, don't ask people what they predict. Ask them what should be done. It's also a good way to figure people out. How moral are the people that you consider friends? One of the ways to find out is to ask them the should question. Use the S word. What should be done? What do you think Joe Biden should do vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine? And see what kind of an answer you get. More than likely, the people you call friends are going to punt. That means that they're not actors. They just, they're reactors. They wait for life to develop. They wait for something to happen, and then they react to it. Not very good. That's not exactly character building. So again, sum up in review, not what will happen, but what should happen. Thank you. And now, a Harvard plan for the working class man. When it came time to build dams or fix roads, the public authorities of the 1970s dithered and quavered. But when there was something they wanted to do, they could muster surprising determination. In the 16 years after 1964, the racial caste system that had so long governed American life was dynamited. But the near-total disregard of public opinion during the dynamiting left behind ever-mounting anger, resentment, and resistance in the people on the receiving end of the endless stream of orders emitted by an adamant and aloof federal government. In the debate over the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Representative Emanuel Seller of New York, the Act's floor manager in the House, forthrightly addressed one of the most damaging arguments of the bill's opponents, that it would be interpreted to require the moving around of school children to attain a mathematical racial balance. Seller insisted there is no authorization for either the Attorney General or the Commissioner of Education to work toward achieving racial balance in the schools. In the Senate, Thomas Kuchel of California insisted that the bill specifically provided that desegregation shall not mean the assignment of students to public schools in order to overcome racial imbalance. Let that be thoroughly understood. And just in case it wasn't thoroughly understood, the Act's leading sponsor, Senator Hubert Humphrey, wrote 2 amendments designed to allay all honest fears of busing. One amendment declared, "Nothing in this title shall prohibit classification and assignment for reasons other than race, color, religion, or national origin." Thus, Humphrey triumphantly pronounced, "Classification along bona fide neighborhood school lines or for any other legitimate reason which local school boards might see fit to adopt would not be affected." In his speeches on the act, Humphrey repeatedly cited the most recent school desegregation court case, the 1963 judgment in Bell v. School City of Gary, Indiana. In Bell, the Court of Appeal for the Seventh Circuit ruled, desegregation does not mean that there must be intermingling of races in all school districts. It means only that they may not be prevented from intermingling or going to school together because of race or color. Bell, Humphrey said, makes it quite clear that while the Constitution prohibits segregation, it does not require integration. The busing of children to achieve racial balance would be an act to effect the integration of schools. In fact, if the bill were to compel it, it would be a violation of the Constitution because it would be handling the matter on the basis of race, and we would be transporting children because of race. The bill does not attempt to integrate the schools, but it does attempt to eliminate segregation in the school systems. Back in a minute. Thank you. Jacob Javits, the liberal Republican senator from New York, who led the fight for the act on the minority side of the aisle, offered his own personal assurance to his federal Republicans that fears of forced busing were negated expressly in the bill. Any government official who sought to use the law to require school-by-school racial balance would be making a fool of himself. It took the federal government all of 24 months to rubbish every one of those solemn guarantees. In April 1966, in the face of all this legislative history and without any judicial authority to support it, the Office of Education and the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare issued regulations stipulating that desegregation should no longer be understood to mean what Humphrey, Cutchell, Javits, and the Seventh Circuit had said it would mean. From now on, school boards in the South would be held accountable for by-the-numbers integration. That regulation was approved later in the year by a federal appeals court and in 1968 by the Supreme Court. The Office of Education now threw away all caution. From using enrollment figures as evidence that deliberate segregation might be occurring, it quickly progressed to using enrollment numbers as evidence that deliberate segregation almost and certainly was occurring, and then finally to using enrollment numbers as evidence of segregation, no matter how strong the evidence that deliberate segregation was not occurring. After 1968, the Education Office hurriedly imposed or negotiated busing agreements, first with the cities across the South, and then the North and the West, beginning with Denver. In 1972, the Supreme Court disregarded the promises by the authors of the 1964 Act, and in Swan v. Charlotte, Mecklenburg Board of Education gave the federal government permission to proceed with virtually any busing scheme it liked. The government liked them all. The public did not. A Gallup poll taken in September 1973 found that large majorities of both blacks and whites favored integrated schools and were prepared to accept ambitious methods to get the job done, shifting the boundaries of school districts and building low-income housing in middle-income areas. But only 9% of blacks and 4% of whites favored busing children outside of their own neighborhoods. Busing was truly a revolution imposed from above, and as expected, it met violent resistance from below. The anti-war demonstrations of the 60s were just a handful of pickets compared to the mass spontaneous outbursts of protest sparked by the busing plans of the 1970s. One bad but not atypical example, busing was ordered for the city of Louisville, Kentucky for the 1975-76 school year. Kentucky was a border state, one in which Jim Crow had been dismantled relatively quietly and in which racial tensions were on the whole low. But because many whites had left the city of Louisville for the blue-collar suburbs of Jefferson County, desegregation, as usual, failed to bring about full integration. So Louisville became one of the list of cities in which federal judges ordered busing across municipal lines. Almost 23,000 pupils were shuttled between downtown and the suburbs. On the first 2 days of busing, the protests were large but relatively orderly. Thousands of blue-collar workers stayed home from their jobs. About 1,000 of them showed up to picket at the area's 165 schools. The serious trouble began on the evening of September 5th, 1975, between 8,000 and 10,000 Jefferson County whites, many of them teenagers, converged by car on Valley High School, honking horns and shouting slogans denouncing busing. They were met by police, and the crowd turned ugly. They pelted the police with abuse, calling them pigs. just like the protesters on television, and then throwing rocks and bottles at them. News of the riot spread throughout the county. Soon crowds were forming at other schools. 1,000 people showed up at another poor white school, Southern High, where they vandalized 39 school buses and a police car. 200 people were arrested that night and 35 were hurt. The next day, the mayor of Louisville banned further demonstrations. He was ignored. Pickets went up around Jefferson County schools on the morning of the 6th. Governor Julian Carroll ordered 800 armed National Guardsmen to Louisville and stationed armed guards on every school bus. The troops restored order, but mounting tension between black and white students provoked the most violent protests of all. On the evening of September 26, 1977, 400 demonstrators gathered again at Southern High School. They threw rocks and bottles at police, who dispersed them with tear gas. Infuriated by these tough tactics, 8,000 townspeople gathered the next day in central Louisville in a march led by a woman in a wheelchair who would, the marchers hoped, deter the police so long as the cameras were running. Back in a minute. Thank you. In the end, Louisville protesters lost. The busing plan went unamended, and the demonstrations gradually subsided. Parents expressed their anger in a more effective way by removing their children from public schools. Between the end of World War II and 1970, the proportion of American children enrolled in private schools had steadily dwindled, largely because Catholics were having fewer children and were becoming more willing to send them to the state's schools. In 1970, that trend abruptly reversed itself. Over the next decade, the proportion of the nation's elementary pupils in private schools would edge up from 1 out of 9 to more than 1 out of 8. Private education is expensive. A more common response to busing was, therefore, to move beyond the reach of the court order into the suburbs or exurbs. Between 1972 and 1980, despite busing, the percentage of black students who attended predominantly minority schools barely budged, 63.6% versus 63.3%. By 1980, only 4 of the nation's 15 largest school systems had an enrollment that was more than half made up of non-Hispanic whites. In the Northeast, the racial isolation of blacks actually increased under busing. 67% of Northeastern black students were enrolled in black majority schools in 1968. 80% were in 1980, more than in 1954. In 1978, a Rand Corporation study of the white attitudes to busing tried to understand the hostility of American whites to busing. Were they bigots? Rand concluded that they were not. Whites, the study authors said, did not believe busing helped race relations, but they felt certain that it wrecked neighborhood schools and aggravated discipline problems. Thus, most white parents believe they are being forced to give up something they value, the neighborhood school, in return for a policy that benefits no one and may even be harmful. Parents voted with their feet because it was the only vote they were permitted. One often hears it said that the 60s introduced a new style of politics to America, the one more participatory, more open than the old. Reading through the decrees and decisions of the courts and commissioners that ordered busing, one has to wonder whether that's true. The judge who drew up the 1970 busing plan for Detroit and its suburbs, a plan encompassing 53 district and independent school districts in Wayne, Macomb, and Oakland counties, dismissed all objections with a contempt as lofty as any ever exuded by any king or cardinal. Within appropriate time limits, he wrote, busing is a considerably safer, more reliable, healthful, and efficient means of getting children to school than either carpools or walking. And this is especially true for younger children. Therefore, for school authorities or private citizens now to object to such transportation practices would raise the inference of not hostility to pupil transportation, but rather racially motivated hostility to the desegregated school at the end of the ride. And this applied not just to 10 and 11-year-old children, but to children in kindergarten too. Transportation of kindergarten children for upwards of 45 minutes one way does not appear unreasonable, harmful, or unsafe in any way. In the absence of some compelling justification, which does not yet appear, kindergarten children should be included in the final plan of desegregation. This overweening judgment was quickly overruled. In fact, Detroit litigation, which came to be known as Milliken v. Bradley, in the end imposed sharp new limits on the power of the lower courts to impose busing. In Milliken, the Nixon appointees to the Supreme Court, Warren Burger, William Rehnquist, and Harry Blackmun, joined with Eisenhower's Potter Stewart and Ford's first appointment, Lewis Powell, to rule that in all but the most exceptional cases, busing orders must halt at municipal boundaries. Children could lawfully be bused within Detroit, but not between Detroit and the surrounding suburbs. That ruling doomed the more ambitious busing plans, but it also sounded the death knell of the industrial cities of the Northeast and Midwest. Parents who resided within city limits confronted a very real task of loading their children onto buses to schools they regarded as unacceptable. Parents who headed out to the suburbs did not. The moral was obvious: sell the house and move. The civil rights bureaucracy was not, however, daunted by this failure of nerve at the Supreme Court. It barreled ahead, unchastened and unrepentant, to the biggest fight of all: Boston. Back in a minute. Thank you. South Boston High was the most troubled high school in Boston, but it was not unique. Hyde Park High was disrupted by riots, and the city's junior high schools also seethed with tension. The troubles convinced Judge Garrity that he had not gone nearly far enough. On May 10, 1975, he released a revised busing plan for the 1975-76 school year, even more radical than the plan for 1974-75. It called for busing 21,000 students, 4,000 more than those, theoretically, bused in the 1974-75 school year. Busing was to be extended all the way down to the first grade. The more sternly Garrity issued decrees, however, the more rapidly the school system dissolved. Polls found that 60% of Boston parents, black and white, agreed that discipline had collapsed in the schools. In spring 1975, South Boston High was exempted from fire drills for fear of the safety of black students if they left the school building. White Bostonians of high school age used addresses of aunts and uncles to enroll in suburban schools. An aide at South Boston High School came upon a black 15-year-old girl sobbing in the lobby, who pleaded with the woman to ask her mother to allow her to quit school. The youngster had not eaten lunch since the start of the school year because she feared going into the cafeteria, scene of numerous fights. The 7-year-old daughter of a white legal secretary came home from school with bruises all over her legs and arms, reporting that gangs of 2nd and 3rd grade black boys and girls were hitting, punching, pinching, and pulling the hair of white pupils. The black pupils bussed into South Boston faced the threat of organized violence every day. Howling, cursing, spitting mobs of adults. The whites faced seemingly endless violence from their classmates. A father wrote to Judge Garrity telling of a black student in jest pulling a knife on his son, and of a black teaching aide's refusal to reprimand him, telling him just to put the knife away. That same man complained that his son and 2 of his friends were mugged by black students during a fire drill. Another father wrote to complain that his daughter came home needing 3 stitches on the back of her head. Father from the comfortable neighborhood of Roselandale said that white children at Philbrick Elementary School were afraid to use the bathrooms and that black pupils threatened violence to bar whites from the playground. The same man said that the 7 Hyde Park High 10th graders with the best grades had been attacked and beaten by a large gang of black classmates. They all left the school. Judge Garrity was unmoved, but his determination to impose his will struck again and again upon the unyielding resistance of the Boston Irish. In September 1975, the teachers walked out on an illegal week-long strike. In October, 200 students marched out of Charlestown High in protest. That same month, there was more violence in South Boston after an all-white South Boston football team played the all-black Dorchester squad. The game ended in an 8-8 tie, and the angry Dorchester fans hurled bottles at the South Boston team. The next day, word of the attack spread through South Boston High, and white students started fights with blacks. 8 blacks and 7 whites were arrested, and 18 students were suspended. 3 days later, on October 26, 1975, 6,000 South Bostonians marched through the streets of the neighborhood. Of the 785 whites enrolled at the school, 782 boycotted classes. All but 26 of the 595 whites enrolled at Charlestown joined the boycott. The students returned to class the next week, and fighting erupted again on November 4, 1975. This time, leading to 8 arrests. In December, Judge Garrity ejected the headmaster of South Boston High and took the school under his own personal control. Back in a minute. Thank you. By spring of the second year, racial incidents were spreading through the whole city of Boston, claiming both white and black victims. At a protest at City Hall, whites from South Boston attacked a black lawyer, stabbing him with the point of a flagpole, seriously wounding him. The next day, in apparent retaliation, black youths in Roxbury stoned the car of a white motorist, causing him to crash. They dragged him out of his car and crushed his skull with paving stones. Police arrived to find the victim lying in the street surrounded by a mob of as many as 100 people chanting, "Let him die." He never recovered from the coma. The third year of integration at South Boston High opened in September 1976. 5 people were sent to hospital and several others arrested during the first month of classes. Interracial violence was reported almost every day. In the first 18 days of school, 196 students were suspended. Boston Motorcycle Police escorted buses to and from the school. State troopers patrolled the corridors inside. A reporter from a local paper, the Herald Advertiser, spent a day in the school in September 1976. It was a typical day without any unusual flare-ups. He kept a minute-by-minute notebook of what he saw. 8:12 a.m., white students slow on entering, black male student arrested for assaulting a teacher. 8:45 a.m., one-on-one fighting in lobby and on second floor during first period filing. 10:25 a.m., black male students and white male students involved in confrontations on second floor. Suspensions reported. 4 white males and 2 black males, 5 days for fighting. 1 white male, 2 black males, and 1 black female, 3 days for fighting. 11:20 a.m., suspensions reported. 1 white male, 3 days for fighting. 1 white male, 5 days for refusing to go to class. 1 black male, 5 days for possession of a weapon, nail. 1:05 p.m., disruption in cafeteria during study period. Books thrown, but no injuries. Some students sent to holding rooms. 3 p.m., suspensions reported. 3 black males and 1 white male. 3 days for book throwing. 1 white male, 3 days for fighting. 3:10 p.m., following up on fight this morning, teacher was taken to City Hospital for broken wrist. The situation never improved. One of the biggest racial brawls at South Boston High occurred as late as October 1980 when white neighborhood toughs tried once again to prevent buses carrying black students from entering the school grounds. The school was obliged to cancel classes for the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. At bottom, the American system is founded on the belief that government ought to respond to the wishes of the majority of the people. Here, however, was an issue in which crushing 90% majorities were ferociously opposed to the decisions of the political authorities. In 1968, 1972, and 1976, the voters elected presidents pledged to halt busing. Congress likewise repeatedly voted to curb busing. Yet the courts, the federal bureaucracy, and increasingly state bureaucracies and local school boards all enforced the busing the people despised. The government had been hijacked, and there was almost nothing an unhappy citizenry could do about it. A remarkably frank book by one of busing's staunchest academic defenders, the Yale sociologist Jennifer Hochschild, expressed the haughty attitude of the busing advocates. If we follow popular wishes, we will not desegregate successfully. To desegregate successfully, authorities must find the will to ignore, temporarily, one hopes, popular opposition. Disregarding public opinion is justified because people learn to accept and even support what they cannot change if they see hope for avoiding an undesirable future. They will struggle to do so. Hochschild misjudged her fellow citizens. The American people were never reconciled to busing, but they did learn its lesson. The power of government had moved from the elected branches to the unelected, had moved to regions beyond the citizens. Power to control. And that was Harvard plan for the middle class man. No, the working class man. Harvard plan for the working class man. From the book. How we got here, the 70s. Thank you. Who is the socialist? He is the man that seeks consensus. He is subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He's informal and terminally unique. He is childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He's impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He's deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He's skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, reminding you to be honest, to be smart, to be beautiful, and to remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.